Hey everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Get Brant's Rants. I apologize, I couldn't get my graphic thing to work on the TV in the back, so it's going to be a blank screen or whatever. But another kind of, I think I'm going to be doing more frequent videos, although they're probably going to be a little bit less specific and a little bit more disorganized just because uh, part of this for me is just kind of trying to sort through a lot of my own feelings. And I think that might be helpful for a lot of other people who are confused because, sometimes we have to say, and so first of all, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and so a lot of people are feeling very isolated. And so there's a certain thing where everybody feels the need to do something. And so I will say it's been great to get out of the apartment and onto the streets and amongst people again. Now, is there a very good chance that I've probably exposed myself to COVID-19 in the days that I've been out there? It's a very high possibility. To me, it's worth it, but everybody has their stuff and everything. And there's also a thing that I am kind of worried about. It's kind of in the back of my head, which is that if I do have COVID-19 and everything, because of course, Father's Day is coming in a couple weeks, and I want to be able to see my kids who kind of have something planned. But my 15-year-old is immunocompromised, and so if I have COVID-19 and everything else, so there's a certain amount of kind of you take the risks that you feel like you have to take, and before I go to get together with my kids again, I will absolutely have to make sure that well, hopefully I can get tested, but we'll see. We'll cross that bridge. The point being, though, we have that. There's a lot of stuff, and especially again, I frequently go on social media, specifically Facebook. I even though Twitter has been actually a lot better about how it's dealing with social control issues, I always have had a kind of philosophical problem with a medium that gives you 140 character minimum or maximum, whenever there was a time that we certain of us in activist and or educational or academic venues would always decry in TV the 30-second soundbite. And how can you really get into the depths of an issue within 30 seconds, and then going from there to even smaller sound bites with Twitter, where it's like, how can you get the depth of an issue in a 140 character tweet? And so these are actually very real logistical concerns that we have. One of the things that I screwed up today was I didn't realize that it was like Blackout Tuesday, and I was like still like posting along, and then I was like, oh no, like halfway through the afternoon, I'm like, oh, oops. So we all have a lot of really mixed feelings about stuff right now. Right now, this past weekend, the next week moving forward, I think that there's a real thing, especially amongst white people, that we really need to wrestle with ourselves and take a moment, because there's a lot of times that this is how to do this, that, and the next thing. And I mean, I'm very clearly guilty of that a lot. But the main thing is that we, like, right now we're talking about the black community and the specific position of vulnerability that the black community is in right now. And so a lot of white activists who are sitting there trying to, like, tell people how to protest or how to organize or how to whatever, it's like, no. And even though we keep saying, like, one of the main messages of, left-wing communities is, like, the time for waiting is over. The main thing is the time for people of color having to wait for real redress to systemic racial issues is over. And we could talk about, how class and other issues, I mean, it can't necessarily wait either, but, there's a very specific, kind of impulse where white people frequently kind of co-opt, and I actually did a little, my last post, in the featured photo, I ended up, putting a Black Lives Matter flag on there. And, there's a little bit that's, it was a little co-opty. So I made a mistake. Not that anybody's, like, yelled at me for it or anything, but kind of recognizing that, while I was trying to, like, and this is one of the things of even this medium, where you don't necessarily know what to do or not to do until you start doing it, and then you're like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Because I want to give support to the organization Black Lives Matter, and that's the thing. However you feel about the current moment, about Black Lives Matter, one of the things is, first of all, check out their websites and everything else. Again, I did mention in my previous video that they have had action plans from the very beginning of what they want to see public policy wise, and there's things that police departments can do, and so that's important, because first of all, we're not reinventing the wheel. There's movements already, and it's, put the support where the support needs to be. There's another thing right now, and this is with the fact that, this whole concept of law and order. And, so I frequently end up saying it is incumbent upon each of us to do the right thing, always. Taken out of context, that is a completely meaningless statement, and I understand that. In context, it is very important. And, that's the thing of, if you're at a protest, especially if you're a white person at one of these protests, and I hope you do go to at least one or two of them, if not, this is actually part of the reason why I'm doing this video, or recording this video today. I'm not going to post it at least until tomorrow, because again, now that I've found out that it's supposed to be Blackout Tuesday and I'm not supposed to be posting on social media, oops. I'm gonna resolve to do that for the rest of the day. But it's important to kind of take note of, that stuff, which is, we frequently end up thinking of ourselves as, kind of the imperfect messenger. And, that's very real for me. Because again, whenever we're talking about things like racialized violence, as a white person, I'm not the best person I'm not the expert. And a lot of the time I'll say, even though I'm broadcasting a message, part of my message is don't listen to me, listen to them. But sometimes if you don't know to listen to this organization or that organization, you look for somebody who's maybe a little bit closer to the situation or whatever, who's it's a funny thing. At the times when I was the most active all the time, and one of the things that I frequently deal with is this sense of guilt that I'm not doing all of the stuff that I used to do, that I'm not as involved and connected. Like, that there were times that I felt like I knew all of who the right activists were, and I knew who to listen to and when and how, and I was working for this organization while volunteering for these 3 other organizations, and then doing this and then doing that, and now I just feel completely isolated, alone, and useless. And and I'll be the first to say, I go to therapy, and a lot of my therapy sessions break down to me having to laugh at myself with my therapist, where I end up, that kind of guilt and self-blame of, like, of all of the protests that I haven't been to, all of the actions that I didn't participate in, all of the actions that I wish I would have been able to do, but didn't or couldn't or whatever. And, so it's funny because, what it will usually devolve to is, the whole world, Trump, classism, racism, it's all your fault because you didn't do enough, right? And whenever she says it, of course, like, that, and it sounds ridiculous enough that it's like, oh yeah, right. This is more than me, and I'm not, like, I'm not responsible because I didn't fix it myself, which kind of gets into that, like, kind of white savior-y stuff that a lot of people are like, yeah, good job, asshole. But those are real feelings that a lot of people feel, and so whenever we start feeling like an imperfect representative, then it ends up demotivating us to end up just kind of giving up and not doing anything. And again, I've had moments and waves where I end up, feeling that, and that's counterproductive. And so there's a very real conflict there, and the reality is, that's true with communities of color too. That there's a lot of black people who are able to take to the streets right now, and there's a lot of black people who can't because they're just tired, or they're just scared, or they're some combination of all of that. And it's just a thing of, hey, we all need to do better. And so, kind of getting to the thing where I was saying with this whole law and order thing, and where I see a lot of people kind of justifying the curfews and everything else is, so first of all, on Facebook, Facebook is a very confrontational atmosphere. And again, I am absolutely guilty. I have a friend from college. Again, dearly love her, but I remember, I was just saying, like, earlier, I was like, okay, I'm about to hurt your feelings. But we need to engage in those ways, though, and have it out a little bit sometimes, because I mean, because if we're never having anything out and we're never getting out of our comfort zone and we're not challenging each other, it's easy to become complicit in things that we really shouldn't be complicit in. And so that's a big thing. So again, with these law and order things, what I see a lot of the time, and again, I've mentioned here that I really enjoy watching the Rising show on the Hill. The last 2 days, I have wanting to scream at Sagar and Jetty. I I don't understand how you don't understand, almost. Especially because of a lot of the very poignant messaging that he's been completely on point with some things, and all of a sudden he's like, oh, well, but you know, the state has to take control at some point. It's like, oh, no. And here's the thing, and here's what I want to say, is that, so, just to give a snapshot to people who feel overwhelmed or feel like this is very binary and rigid of a system. You know, it's not, authoritarianism, while it is based upon these ideas of very centralized sources of power and authority, which is why it's called authoritarian, are often not very smart. And I say not very smart not because they aren't necessarily focused, and sometimes it's a little too hyper-focused on a little too much of the wrong issues. And that's the thing. You know, because again, with this Rising thing, I am one of those people that I do actually think that Donald Trump is a little too scarily similar to Mussolini. And that is not to say that I don't think that Donald Trump isn't a complete bumbling fucking buffoon. Because he is. It's that, so was Mussolini. So was Hitler. They were malicious, but they weren't smart malicious. They were surrounded by some people who were smart malicious. And that's where, you know, I personally think, you know, like, for example, Joe Arpaio, I think, is a fucking monster of a human being. If there's anybody who belongs in a prison, who needs to have his freedom taken away from him because he is a danger to humanity, it is Joe fucking Arpaio. I don't think that there is some, you know, dark web conspiracy where, you know, this is all one single white nationalist organization and agenda that's finally consolidating its power. If you hear me talking about white nationalism or white supremacy or Christian nationalism or any of that, it's not because I think, like, these are the smartest people in America and they're out to dominate us. It's, I mean, you know, a couple weeks ago I had a thing of, you know, the trap of cultural issues and how class is, some people believe that, hey, this is all a function of class. And it's all about rich people versus poor people, and the rich people are dividing out the poor people into races in order to distract. And while a lot of that is in fact true, it also is not entirely, it's not the full picture. It's not just a function of class. Race is a very real thing. And even though race is a social construct, that whenever you start breaking down, like, eugenicists have this, a running theory that there's, like, the five main races and they all have to stay separate and everything. The philosophy and the ideology is stupid and untrue. However, that doesn't mean that people's experiences of race and with racism aren't very, very real. And look at it. Look at the situation. And that's the thing where, it's not about having one or two black people who can become wealthy enough that they can defy the law. Like, a lot of people will end up frequently talking about, like, for example, like the O.J. Simpson thing, or the fact that Barack Obama got to be the president. It's like, well, it's nice that a rich black man was able to get away with murder, but that's not the experience of poor black people, or really most black people in general. It's great that we had a black president, but if the actual lived experiences of black Americans, or black people in general in the world, are such that they are constantly devalued, that is a very big problem. So the problems are complex, but and so are the solutions, and that's part of it. When some of us, whenever we talk about, like, what is anarchy or whatever else and stuff, and some of the panic that you do see in some of the journalists, whenever they're like, oh my God, the police are no longer in control, it's anarchy. And, the fact that some of us aren't afraid of that is the fact that, like, whenever we talked about, focusing on Minneapolis right now, with, that first night or those first couple of nights of protests, community leaders were still on the ground. The people who led the protests, there's people leading a lot of these protests, and people take control, and a lot of us, like, kind of splinter off, and it's like, hey, I showed up to this action for here, but, we have to go, and, because everybody's lives are still happening, so it's like, we're going to leave and go get food now, and then we're going to come back, and, this is what a movement is, like, we're not all at every single action every single day, and it's not all the same people. And we come in and we come out, and as much as possible, I want to encourage more and more white people, just come out. And I guess that's one of my things. I like feeling like I'm teaching. That's when I feel like the most comfortable. That's when I feel the most secure in my own abilities, is whenever I'm able to just kind of be in the presence of people taking action, and having somebody who's kind of newer to any sort of social justice movement, I don't care what it is, and being able to use my own historical knowledge or lived experience and everything to be able to try to form context. And so I've had a couple of arguments and debates and stuff like that with some of my, more right-wing leaning friends. And I guess the biggest thing that I'd like to say, in one of my posts said, like, I don't know who needs to hear this, but I feel safer in a crowd of pissed off people of color who have been pushed to the brink than I ever will in a room of, as a white gay man, than I ever will in a room full of either police or Christian nationalists. And I think that's part of this thing, whenever we talk about racial anxiety. I remember growing up in Connecticut, there was this, in white suburban Connecticut, I remember how many of my friends were like, "Oh my God, we're in Bridgeport. What's gonna happen?" I remember friends being like, "Oh my God, that black person looked at me while I was driving in my car. Am I in danger?" It sounds fucking stupid, and I mean, let's be honest, it is. But it's real. It's a real thing, and this is part of this whole thing. Whenever you look at movies and stuff like that, Hairspray was a good one with like I think Penny's mom, who like every single like when she had to go to the black neighborhood, and she was like terrified of every single person that she walked by. It's like, come on, you know. So to any of my more right-leaning friends, or even my centrist friends who feel like this is a black issue, I'm going to sit this out, or especially any of my white friends who feel like they should be doing it differently. Uh, Come with me one day. Just message me. I would love to 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 come to a protest with you and try to explain what's going on. There's two conditions. Number one, I don't do armed. I don't go to anything armed. I don't do armed. I understand that there are some people who do armed. Not with me. I have a very strong set of feelings about how weaponization in general ends up leading to you're going to hurt the people that you're trying to protect. I I don't think it's not a necessarily every time thing. It's a statistically, if you think of it, I like to think of it almost like a chemistry thing. At a molecular level, everything's just molecules and atoms like just banging into each other, and then what will happen happens, and certain patterns emerge. That's it's the same thing in social levels. Uh, you know, the more that you are interacting in agitated situations and you have a weapon, the more likely either that weapon will be used in the wrong way. Um, and that's my number one. And my number two is I need you to be able to commit to listening more than talking. It's just the two things. Don't come armed, and be willing to listen more than you talk. And I'd love to kind of be, some people end up being like, oh well, if you're not doing this, then you're not a protester. You're a tourist. Be a tourist. Be a tourist with me. Come on. I'd love to be your tour guide to liberation and democracy in action. I, like, hey, maybe that's my role. Is I'm just a freaking tour guide to show people who haven't been really introduced to what social justice as a concept is and how it functions. Let me be your tour guide. Because I can guarantee, even if you voted for Donald Trump and everything else, but you are starting to see that there's more to it than that, let me be your tour guide. I promise that if we go and, here in Baltimore, I live in Baltimore, I'm going to take action in Baltimore. I have a lot of feelings about what's going on in D.C. I have worked and done enough in DC that I feel like almost out of place because I'm not there. doing stuff right now, but I live in Baltimore right now, and Baltimore needs action too, and so I'm taking action in Baltimore right now. So I haven't been to any of the DC protests recently. I've gone to several of the Baltimore ones. But look, I'm not out every single day. Yesterday was a day I had intended to go out and everything. I had a friend who was going to kind of meet with me, and because of everything being blocked off and everything else, we couldn't necessarily get together. And, without somebody to go with, I ended up opting out. And, call that a failure. To some degree it is. To another degree, it's trying to remind myself, and also to try to remind some of my friends that if we're in it for the long haul, we need to pace ourselves too. I love all of the people who are out there every single day and have the energy and have the motivation and have it right now. Again, in talking to some of my activist friends, we keep talking and we're like, I feel like we've been warning about this happening for so long. Now that it's happening, we're like, shit, we're not ready. We were still trying to convince people that this was happening. And that's where we are. That's where so many of us are. That, and it's part of this whole thing of you should do peaceful protest. We done been doing it, so many of us, at the time when we were kind of ready to, hit the ground and do action every single day, several actions a day. Some of us are older and more tired now, and again, as a white person, I feel like that's kind of making an excuse for myself. But there's also a lot of people who are in the same boat. It's like, oh, but that's also why and where a lot of these younger activists or even older activists who are just like, hey, they have the energy now, do it, let's do it. And so it's trying to get more motivation for myself to be out there more than I have been, and to get involved in other ways than I have been. And so, part of it is, I'm making these videos, and again, I don't really self-promote, so how much impact am I having if I'm only, touching 10 people at a time? But I also have this sense of, by self-promoting, you're kind of, am I promoting my videos or my channel, or am I trying to say things that are meaningful? And it's almost like an either or. And so if I'm saying something that really touched you and you think other people can benefit from what I'm saying, share it and boost it and whatever. If you think I'm an asshole and you want to call me out, share it and put a target on my head too. I am not immune to being pushed, and sometimes I need to be. And if you think that I'm just making noise for the sake of making noise, just ignore it. All of them are valid, as long as that your position is your position. All of us, our position is our position. The more we can question ourselves, the more we can push ourselves, the better off we all are. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that for now. I obviously have a lot of other stuff I want to say, but I'm already going way long on this video, and if I'm committing myself to making more videos more frequently, then I don't have to do it all right now. So I hope that's at least enough of a picture for people with regard to... Oh, no, I didn't even say the main thing that I wanted to say. I'm sorry. Because we keep talking about this whole law and order thing and the breakdown of law and order and anarchy or anything else. The point is that community leaders actually are in control a lot of the time. And so whenever we see the looting and things like that, what you have to understand, there are things like, these cartels or, white supremacists exist. White supremacist groups and white supremacist bad faith actors. And the Proud Boys are an organization, and I think they're shitty assholes for the most part. I think most of the people who are in the Proud Boys now, in 10 years, are going to be like, fuck. Because sometimes it's just a matter of learning. And, it's easy to have that, and this is the whole thing with authoritarianism, is that, inherently it's kind of looking for those short and easy answers. It's also an abdication of responsibility. I'm not responsible, the state is responsible. I'm not responsible for systemic racism. I want the state to do it. I want them to take it on. And that's the root of authoritarian conflict. Because if you're ultimately responsible for the world that you live in, that if you have this, kind of philosophy of stewardship, then you end up being more like me, where you're like, I'm not doing enough because there's terrible things in the world and I'm not stopping it. So it's a dynamic tension. You don't want to be in a position where you are constantly feeling like you're responsible for everything, but at the same time you can't abdicate your responsibility for the role that you do or can play in the world and in your local community. And so that's the dynamic tension. But I want to say, and whenever we talk about, like, what's the role of police and what's the role of anybody, like, police at their best, and this is, again, it's not a United States thing, it's in general in any society, police are at their best when they're community leaders. When they work in, live in, and act in their community. When they know the people that they're working with. And, again, it's that whole idea of serve and protect. How many of our police officers, to be real and honest, how many of our police officers really see themselves as serving their community versus, because we don't want to say policing the community, but it's telling the community how to act, or enforcing enforcing punishment upon people, and this is part of this whole thing of where if your first thought on seeing a police officer is, oh shit, what did I do wrong? Or what am I doing wrong? Or am I doing something wrong? And all of a sudden you're afraid, we've done something wrong as a society. And that's a sociological phenomenon that, even white people, you do it too. Like, how many white people are like, oh, thank God there's a cop here, I feel safer now. No! Maybe some people do, but um, community leaders, community leadership. If even if all law breaks down, the reality is community leaders are still leaders. You know, people who are willing to look other people in the eye and say, "Hey, no, you know you're not supposed to be doing that. We don't need that." That's where a lot of these community leaders, and again, lean in on the victories. That in the midst of some of these protests that have even in going so far as devolving to a riot, look at all of the situations where the people who are on the streets, the protesters, demonstrators, and everybody else, are able to say, no, not that building, not that business, not that whatever, not that person. Even in Louisville's another kind of nightmarish situation right now. Where one officer got separated from his squad and a whole bunch of black men linked up arms and protected him. I mean, come on, celebrate the victories of humanity. That is community leadership. That's community leadership. And so what you need to understand is that even if all of the systems and all the structures wash away, that people will still come together and find ways to do right. That's a really uncomfortable position to be in, to recognize that fact, because then it does kind of get you into the kind of modes of thinking that I'm kind of closer to ideologically, which is that our systems and structures should mostly go away, because if people are gonna, if at the end of the day, outside of those systems and structures of developed authority, that more people end up doing right, then that means the systems and the structures are actually creating a lot of the problems. And so then it becomes kind of like a moral imperative to get rid of a lot of those systems and structures, right? So this is the heart of the difference between right-wing and left-wing ideologies. And I say ideologies because, again, there's a lot of different left-wing ideologies. There's a lot of different right-wing ideologies too. It's all getting down to, how many systems and structures do you feel comfortable with having a role in how society works. And that's where, there's a lot of ways that I'm an anarchist. There's a few ways that I'm a communist. There's a few ways that I'm a socialist. I'm more of a socialist when it comes to, we need a set minimum standard to make sure that everybody's human rights are met. For things like, water. If every individual person was responsible for securing their own clean water and maintaining it, it would be a freaking nightmare. So in those senses, I personally think, let's try to go with some sort of more socialist ideal where everybody has access to clean water and there's a certain minimum standard and everybody has to follow it, and we need an enforcement mechanism. And I personally feel like any sort of enforcement mechanism should be aimed more at preventing wrongdoing than allowing wrongdoing to happen and then punishing it. That's another very important note. Because I think in the United States at least, our criminal justice system is all based upon not prevention, but punishment after it's too late. And I think that creates a kind of reinforcing of a lot of the already problematic issues that we have societally. And it's one of the ways that I think there's a lot of opportunity to a massive restructuring of our society, because I would love to see us doing more where it's about preventing harm or preventing wrongdoing than about letting harm and wrongdoing happen and then punishing it after the fact. And that's a big thing, even with, especially the corporatism, is that a lot of corporations kind of program in the punishment. All right, well, we're going to have to pay OSHA fines, and, it's still worthwhile for us to continue abusing our workers and, causing health violations and worker violations and everything else. And then we'll just pay the fine later because we still make more off of not doing the front end stuff, but just paying the punishment, and systemically that has been a problem. And we've, generationally, we've reinforced that more and more rather than restructuring it. So anyway, I'm sorry. So that was my main point, though, is, whenever we're kind of in fear of those very real tensions where our communities are in pain and are expressing their anger and their outrage, it's very easy to try to seek safety and solace by imposing authority. The problem is that over-exercising authority was already the problem. And so, adding these curfews and everything else is just adding more of the problem to the problem, thinking it's going to solve the problem. And it's where we're in a bad place. I mean, you can't pretend it's not a bad place. But the solutions, as scary as it is, to say, hey, we're gonna disarm as police, and we're gonna stand with you and walk with you. It's the only way, really. Again, I just spent like a freaking half an hour thing saying that not everything is the only way, but the only way forward is together. That sounds like meaningless drivel too. But it's it's that real thing of you can't impose authority, because all you're doing is inflicting more harm. And when the problem is that too much harm has been inflicted, there is no amount of re-inflicting or redoubling efforts to inflict harm is going to do. It's not going to solve any of our problems. It's not. So anyway, right-wing people, centrist people, people who just feel uncomfortable with protesting in general, message me. Let's figure out sometime. Let me be your tour guide to, this thing called social justice. If you're already on the left and you're just looking for, a reminder that you're doing the right thing, you're doing the right thing. Let's keep doing it. Let's keep pushing. Because I'm proud of the community organizers in Baltimore. Proud of the community organizers for the events that I've participated in. quite frankly, and this is one of those things that, it's great for me to be able to go to a protest and just participate and not be organizing it or in charge of anything. Because I've been that guy in charge of stuff and feeling like everything's going wrong and everybody's criticizing you and you can't seem to get a break and everything else. I've also been that guy, they're criticizing. Obviously, that's a thing that we, a lot of us have been there, and we mostly regret it. But we're keep trying, keep pushing, lean in, listen. Um, we're gonna get to a better place because we have to. All right. Talk to you soon.